Well, they poked the wrong cowboys this time. It started with a drum circle and a hashtag and ended with riot shields, tear gas, and steel horses charging through the chaos. Chicago, Portland, Los Angeles, all burning under the banner of the so-called No Kings movement, a protest against a monarchy that doesn't even exist. Unless, of course, you count the one that was built by George Soros' money and the media's lies. And when the streets turned violent, when Antifa's masked mob thought they owned the night, something legendary happened. The cavalry came. Real cowboys, mounted police, unshaken, unbothered, DGAF. They don't give a freak, okay? They didn't even wait for permission. They didn't bend to the mob. They rode straight into it. And this time, they weren't even alone. In fact, President Donald J. Trump unleashed the National Guard to ride side by side with America's cowboy cops, and the results were glorious. The same networks that spent 4 years screaming, defund the police, they're now calling the riots peaceful gatherings. The same journalists who fanned the flames about crying about over-response, but America saw the truth. Live, unfiltered, viral. The people who tried to burn this country down just got stomped in the streets by the lawmen that they swore to destroy. This is the moment that the tide turned. The night that the No Kings fantasy met reality. And tonight, I want to go ahead and break down exactly how this happened, the Antifa funding trail, the media spin, the governors who joined the fight, and of course, the cowboy cops who reminded the world that in Trump's America, law and order rides again. Hit the like button, subscribe. Okay, so it all started with this nationwide No Kings protest. This was a movement that was supposed to be about equality and quickly became pretty much a circus of chaos. In Democrat-run cities all across America, the streets filled with smoke, flares, and slogans that no one seemed to even understand. What began as a symbolic rejection of tyranny looked more like a music festival gone wrong, complete with costumes, drums, and rage without reason. By nightfall, the line between demonstration and destruction completely vanished. Fireworks cracked over federal buildings while activists live streamed themselves shouting about monarchy in a country that hasn't had one for like 250 years. Phones lit up with viral clips before police could even form a line. And that's when the chaos truly caught fire. Images of clowns, masks, and burning flags raced through social media like gasoline on asphalt. Now, across the nation, people watched and they whispered the same question. What exactly are they fighting for out there? Chicago became ground zero for absurdity. On Michigan Avenue, protesters marched dressed as insects and painted clowns, calling it performance resistance, but the only thing that they resisted was dignity. This was the scene that defined the collapse. Activists crawling on the pavement, waving fake crowns, chanting "No Kings" at a government that already answers to voters. So what exactly are they even talking about, right? Police tried to hold formation as the mob taunted them with whistles and silly string and ultimately turning the loop into a fever dream. The crowd claimed that they were saving democracy, but it looked more like self-parody. Officers reported injuries from bottles and fireworks, while city leaders hesitated to condemn anything that was expressive. Cameras caught the moment when one protester screamed at an officer's horse, and the animal didn't flinch. Now, you gotta be halfway brain dead to scream at a horse, right? So anyway, that viral clip became the symbol of the night, the calm, unshaken strength of America's cowboy cops facing a generation that confuses anarchy with activism. Millions of seniors across the United States are getting a message from their doctors saying, we will no longer accept your insurance next year. Call Chapter to get your new coverage. Now, your Medicare plan shapes more than your health care. It actually shapes your legacy. In fact, the wrong plan can drain savings and leave stress for your family. This is why I partner with Chapter. They help you to choose Medicare coverage that aligns with your values and protects your family's future. Now, one of our viewers, she said, Chapter helped me feel proud of the choices I made with my Medicare plan. So let me ask, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? Now, most people are already securing theirs by calling that phone number right there at the bottom, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. That phone number again is 909-563-8279. So by the time the chaos hit Los Angeles, the message was very clear. This wasn't a protest anymore. This was an organized performance of rage. When the crowd turned violent outside of City Hall, the LAPD rolled out their secret weapon, the Mounted Division. Cameras caught the moment that these cowboy cops charged through smoke and debris, their horses kicking up sparks and broken glass. Protesters sprayed silly string, tossed bottles, and lit flares, but the cavalry didn't blink. One officer shouted, "Move back or get moved." Just pure, unfiltered law enforcement. The image went viral within minutes. Memes labeled the samurai cops and the phrase DGAF cavalry. It exploded online. They didn't retreat. They didn't negotiate. They rode right through it. And in that moment, millions of Americans saw what they had been craving since Trump took office again. Real authority. Not politics, not press conferences, just law and order with hooves of steel. So as this footage from Los Angeles spread, calls poured into Washington. President Trump didn't hesitate. The order went out. Restore peace, protect the people, and back the blue. By dawn, National Guard convoys were rolling into key hotspots, Portland, Chicago, even Austin, where left-wing governors had looked the other way for way too long. Trump appeared on live television that morning, standing beside Defense Secretary Kash Patel, declaring, "We will not let America burn for ratings." Governors like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis immediately pledged support, coordinating Guard and state troopers under a unified command. The sight was surreal, guys. You had armored Humvees beside mounted police, drones overhead, and curfews enforced for the first time in years. Media pundits called it the optics of tyranny, but to ordinary Americans that are watching from their living rooms, it looked like safety. After years of hesitation under the old administration, order had returned, and it rode in under President Trump's watch. And this is why I have to ask you something, honestly. What is the number one frustration that you have when it comes to growing your savings or your investments? Because while President Trump was restoring order, law and order in the streets, millions of Americans were still fighting for their own battles at home against inflation, bad advice, and a financial system that really feels rigged. Now, hold that thought because I want to circle back to that later, but let's first head north, where Portland's chaos reached a boiling point. Portland tried to play cute at first. Organizers called it a peaceful art march, complete with bubble machines, chalk drawings, and paper mache crowns. But by nightfall, those bubbles turned into tear gas clouds. A handful of agitators, masked and armed with fireworks, began hurling explosives toward federal property. The same city that once vowed to defund law enforcement all of a sudden found itself begging for backup. Federal agents stood behind barricades as activists chanted "No kings, no tyrants," right up until one of them lobbed a flashbang straight back at the officers. The boom echoed across downtown and chaos erupted. Flares lit up the skyline while riot shields pushed through the haze. The contrast was almost poetic if you think about it. The so-called movement of peace gasping under its own smoke, journalists in gas masks whispered through the static. This is not what the organizers promised. The illusion shattered. Portland, once the left's model of resistance, it became the cautionary tale of what happens when fantasy meets federal force. Now, while the streets burned, the money trail began to surface. Watchdog groups started connecting the dots. Grants from global democracy foundations, activist nonprofits with ties to known Antifa fonts, and shell charities conveniently headquartered in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. Millions in so-called community development funds were quietly redirected toward protest logistics, travel stipends, and social media campaigns. The same slogans seen in Portland and Chicago, well, they were the same ones that were printed by the same two organizations. The same No Kings banners, paid for through a grant backed by one very familiar name, George Soros. Even mainstream outlets couldn't ignore the overlap anymore. Tax filing showed a paper trail from donor networks to the very same groups that are now demanding revolution. And once again, the pattern held true: global money funding local chaos. As investigators dug deeper, it became clear this wasn't organic outrage. This was engineered unrest. The real question wasn't who started the fire. It was who kept paying to keep it burning. Now, within hours of the riots, the mainstream media did what they always do: basically rewrite reality. MSNBC aired overhead shots of burning intersections while chirping anchors described the chaos as a peaceful demonstration of democratic expression. Rolling Stone magazine even published its glowing recap before the protest began, already labeling them as a nationwide call for unity. Unity? The footage told a completely different story. You saw flags burning, windows shattered, police bleeding. CNN looped footage of one smiling protester blowing bubbles as if that would erase the violence that were taking place 2 blocks over. And when reporters were pressed about the fires, they blamed over-enthusiastic participants. The script was obvious: protect the movement, shield the donors, and gaslight the public. Americans watching at home, they saw straight through this instantly. They weren't seeing patriots. They were seeing an America hate parade. The same pundits who scolded Trump for enforcing law and order now praised anarchy as activism. The spin wasn't journalism, it was damage control for chaos that they helped to create. Then came the interviews, the part that nobody could believe. Reporters stuck microphones in faces, and protesters froze like deers in headlights. Why are you here? Complete silence. What policy are you protesting? Blank stares. One girl finally admitted, I don't even know. Everybody else is here, so I came too. Another waved a sign calling Trump a criminal, but couldn't even name a single crime that he allegedly committed. These weren't revolutionaries. These were human parrots repeating whatever the algorithm fed them that day. The original Cowboy Cops DGAF clip captured this perfectly. An entire crowd unable to explain its own slogans. The more questions that were asked, the less anyone knew. It was activism without intellect, outrage without origin. They called it democracy, but it looked more like groupthink on autopilot. As the interviews circulated online, America laughed and then it cringed. This wasn't resistance. This was proof that the loudest voices in the streets had no idea what they were fighting for. Now, beneath the smoke and the slogans, a deeper war was unfolding. Not just in the streets, but in the soul of the country. On one side stood Trump's America, working families, police officers, veterans, small business owners, people who believe in order, accountability, and freedom without apology. But on the other side, the so-called No Kings movement, fueled by globalist donors, media manipulation, and emotion over evidence, they weren't fighting tyranny. They were fighting structure itself. The movement preached rebellion while demanding government handouts, shouted freedom while enforcing speech codes. Trump's message, by contrast, was simple. America doesn't need kings because the people already rule. And as his administration rolled out the guard to restore peace, the contrast couldn't be clearer. Their chaos versus his control. The divide was no longer left versus right. It was sanity versus spectacle, patriots versus performance art. And for the first time in years, common sense was winning again. Now, it only took one clip to change everything. A mounted officer surrounded by smoke, pointing his battalion toward a fleeing mob. Calm, fearless, unmoved. The video hit social media at sunrise, and within hours, well, it was everywhere. Hashtag Cowboy Cops DGAF rocketed to the top of X and Truth Social, pulling in millions of views per hour. Conservative outlets called it cowboy justice, but even moderates admitted that they'd never seen such composure under pressure. For a nation exhausted by excuses and performative outrage, the sight of authority restored, it was magnetic. The left called it brutality, but the silent majority called it leadership. It wasn't about violence. It was about balance, about reminding the mob that freedom without order is just chaos in costume. When the clip aired on primetime, applause broke out in living rooms across America. The people were done apologizing for wanting peace. The Cowboys had drawn the line, and the nation stood behind them. So when the dust finally settled, the panic inside the establishment, it was almost audible. Network producers were yanking segments off the air mid-broadcast, MSNBC quietly editing its peaceful protest headlines, Rolling Stone magazine deleted tweets faster than they could write new ones. Even local mayors who had spent years lecturing about compassion and restraint, all of a sudden, they discovered their inner law and order voice. In Chicago, city council members demanded to know why riot organizers were tied to NGO grant money. In DC, leaked emails showed that talking points about peaceful dissent had been circulated before this first march even began. The spin had collapsed. Democrats who once sneered at the phrase, "back the blue," now muttered about safety for all communities. Too late, guys, too late. The footage had already reached every corner of America. Every voter had already seen the difference between chaos and control, and no amount of late-night damage control could erase the fact that Trump's America had restored order while their side lit the match. So October 21st, 2025 will be remembered as the day that America stopped apologizing for its backbone. It wasn't about red or blue. It was about right and wrong. From Portland to Chicago to Los Angeles, the message was heard loud and clear. When you threaten peace, the Cowboys ride. Those men and women on horseback, those guard troops standing shoulder to shoulder with police, reminded us that courage still exists in uniform. The media can twist it, elites can sneer at it, but the people saw what they saw. Lawmen who refused to bow down to the mob. This was the turning of the tide, the end of excuse making, the rebirth of accountability. For the first time in years, citizens cheered at their screens instead of groaning. And as the sun rose over calmer streets, one truth became undeniable. The Cowboys didn't just restore law and order, they reminded a restless nation who's still in charge, the people.